Hello, friends, and welcome. My name is Marcus, and I will be calmly reading for you tonight 2 short stories by Lucy Maud Montgomery. The first story is entitled The Girl and the Photograph, and the second, Jessamine. If you're new to the channel and enjoy listening to calm bedtime stories, I encourage you to subscribe. I publish new stories on a regular basis. Now, let us unwind. Find a comfortable and safe place to relax. Your favorite chair, your sofa, a comfortable spot in your bed. And let us begin these stories. The Girl and the Photograph. When I heard that Peter Austin was in Vancouver, I hunted him up. I had met Peter 10 years before, when I had gone east to visit my father's people, and had spent a few weeks with an uncle in Croydon. The Austins lived across the street from Uncle Tom, and Peter and I had struck up a friendship. Although he was a hobbledehoy of awkward 16, and I, at 22, was older and wiser and more dignified than I ever been since, or ever expected to be again. Peter was a jolly little round freckled chap. He was all right when no girls were around. When they were, he retired within himself like a misanthropic oyster, and was about as interesting. This was the one point upon which we always disagreed. Peter couldn't endure girls. I was devoted to them by the wholesale. The Croydon girls were pretty and vivacious. I had a score of flirtations during my brief sojourn among them. But when I went away, the face I carried in my memory was not that of any girl with whom I had walked and driven and played the game of hearts. It was 10 years ago, but I had never been quite able to forget this girl's face. Yet I had seen it but once, and then only for a moment. I had gone for a solitary ramble in the woods over the river, and in a lonely little valley, dim with pines, where I thought myself alone, I had come suddenly upon her, standing ankle-deep in fern on the bank of a brook, the late evening sunshine falling yellowly on her uncovered dark hair. She was very young, no more than 16, yet the face and eyes were already those of a woman. Such a face. Beautiful? Yes. But I thought of that afterward, when I was alone. With that face before my eyes, I thought only of its purity and sweetness, of the lovely soul and rich mind looking out of the great greyish-blue eyes, which, in the dimness of the pine shadows, looked almost black. There was something in the face of that child-woman I had never seen before, and was destined never to see again in any other face. Careless boy though I was, it stirred me to the deeps. I felt that she must have been waiting forever in the Pine Valley for me, and that, in finding her, I had found all of good that life could offer me. I would have spoken to her, but before I could shape my greeting into words that should not seem rude or presumptuous, she had turned and gone, stepping lightly across the brook and vanishing in the maple copse beyond. For no more than 10 seconds had I gazed into her face, and the soul of her, the real woman behind the fair outwardness, had looked back into my eyes, but I had never been able to forget it. When I returned home, I questioned my cousin diplomatically as to who she might be. I felt strangely reluctant to do so. It seemed in some way sacrilege, yet only by so doing could I hope to discover her. They could tell me nothing, nor did I meet her again during the remainder of my stay in Croydon, although I never went anywhere without looking for her, and haunted the Pine Valley daily in the hope of seeing her again. My disappointment was so bitter that I laughed at myself. I thought I was a fool to feel thus about a girl I had met for a moment in a chance ramble. A mere child at that, with her hair still hanging in its long glossy schoolgirl braid. But when I remembered her eyes, my wisdom forgave me. Well, that was 10 years ago. In those 10 years the memory had, I must confess, grown dimmer. In our busy Western life, a man had not much time for sentimental recollections. Yet I had never been able to care for another woman. I wanted to. I wanted to marry and settle down. I had come to that time of life when a man wearies of drifting and begins to hanker for a calm anchorage in some snug haven of his own. But somehow I shirked the matter. It seemed rather easier to let things slide. At this stage, Peter came west. He was something in a bank, and was as round and jolly as ever. But he had evidently changed his attitude towards girls, for his rooms were full of their photos. They were stuck around everywhere, and they were all pretty. Either Peter had excellent taste, or the Croydon photographers knew how to flatter. But there was one on the mantel which attracted my attention especially. If the photo were to be trusted, the girl was quite the prettiest I had ever seen. "Peter, what pretty girl's picture is this on your mantel?" I called out to Peter, who was in his bedroom, donning evening dress for some function. "That's my cousin, Marian Lindsay," he answered. "She is rather nice-looking, isn't she? Lives in Croydon now. Used to live up the river at Chislehurst. Didn't you ever chance across her when you were in Croydon?" "No," I said. "If I had, I wouldn't have forgotten her face." "Well, she'd be only a kid then, of course. She's 26 now. Marian is a mighty nice girl, but she's bound to be an old maid. She's got notions, ideals, she calls them. All the Croydon fellows have been in love with her at one time or another, but they might as well have made up to a statue. Marian really hasn't a spark of feeling or sentiment in her. Her looks are the best part of her, although she's confoundedly clever." Peter spoke rather spiffily. I suspected that he had been one of the smitten swains himself. I looked at the photo for a few minutes longer, admiring it more every minute, and when I heard Peter coming out, I did an unjustifiable thing. I took that photo and put it in my pocket. I expected Peter would make a fuss when he missed it, but that very night the house in which he lived burned to the ground. Peter escaped with the most important of his goods and chattels. But all the counterfeit presentments of his dear divinities went up in smoke. If he ever thought particularly of Marian Lindsay's photograph, he must have supposed that it shared the fate of the others. As for me, I propped my ill-gotten treasure up on my mantel and worshipped it for a fortnight. At the end of that time, I went boldly to Peter and told him I wanted him to introduce me by letter to his dear cousin, and ask her to agree to a friendly correspondence with me. Oddly enough, I did not do this without some reluctance, in spite of the fact that I was as much in love with Marian Lindsay as it was possible to be through the medium of a picture. I thought of the girl I had seen in the pine wood, and felt an inward shirking from a step that might divide me from her forever. But I rated myself for this nonsense. It was in the highest degree unlikely that I should ever meet the girl of the pines again. If she were still living, she was probably some other man's wife. I would think no more about it. Peter whistled when he heard what I had to say. "Of course I'll do it, old man," he said obligingly. "But I warn you, I don't think it will be much use. Marian isn't the sort of girl to open up a correspondence in such a fashion. However, I'll do the best I can for you. Do tell her I'm a respectable fellow with no violent bad habits and all that. I'm in earnest, Peter. I want to make that girl's acquaintance, and it seems the only way at present. I can't get off just now for a trip east. Explain all this, and use your cousinly influence in my behalf if you possess any." Peter grinned. "It's not the most graceful job in the world you're putting me on, Curtis," he said. "I don't mind owning up now that I was pretty far gone on Marian myself 2 years ago. It's all over now, but it was bad while it lasted. Perhaps Marian will consider your request more favorably if I put it in the light of a favor to myself. She must feel that she owes me something for wrecking my life." Peter grinned again and looked at the one photo he had contrived to rescue from the fire. It was a pretty, snub-nosed girl. She would never have consoled me for the loss of Marian Lindsay, but every man to his taste. In due time, Peter sought me out to give me his cousin's answer. "Congratulations, Curtis. You've out-Caesared Caesar. You've conquered without even going and seeing. Marian agrees to a friendly correspondence with you. I'm amazed, I admit, even though I did paint you up as a sort of Sir Galahad and Lancelot combined. I'm not used to seeing proud Marian do stunts like that, and it rather takes my breath." I wrote to Marian Lindsay after one farewell dream of the girl under the pines. When Marian's letters began to come regularly, I forgot the other one altogether. Such letters, such witty, sparkling, clever, womanly, delightful letters. They completed the conquest her picture had begun. Before we had corresponded 6 months, I was besottedly in love with this woman, whom I had never seen. Finally, I wrote and told her so, and I asked her to be my wife. A fortnight later, her answer came. She said frankly that she believed she had learned to care for me during our correspondence, but that she thought we should meet in person before coming to any definite understanding. Could I not arrange to visit Croydon in the summer? Until then, we would better continue on our present footing. I agreed to this, but I considered myself practically engaged, with the personal meeting merely to be regarded as a sop to the Cerberus of conventionality. I permitted myself to use a decidedly lover-like tone in my letters henceforth, and I hailed it as a favorable omen that I was not rebuked for this, although Marian's own letters still retained their pleasant, simple friendliness. Peter had first tormented me mercilessly about the affair. But when he saw I did not like his chaff, he stopped it. Peter was always a good fellow. He realized that I regarded the matter seriously, and he saw me off when I left for the East with a grin tempered by honest sympathy and understanding. "Good luck to you," he said. "If you win Marian Lindsay, you'll win a pearl among women. I haven't been able to grasp her taking to you in this fashion, though. It's so unlike Marian, but since she undoubtedly has, you are a lucky man. I arrived in Croydon at dusk and went to Uncle Tom's. There I found them busy with preparations for a party to be given that night in honor of a girl friend who was visiting my cousin Edna. I was secretly annoyed, for I wanted to hasten at once to Marian, but I couldn't decently get away. And on second thoughts, I was consoled by the reflection that she would probably come to the party. I knew she belonged to the same social set as Uncle Tom's girls. I should, however, have preferred our meeting to have been under different circumstances. From my stand behind the palms in a corner, I eagerly scanned the guests as they arrived. Suddenly my heart gave a bound. Marian Lindsay had just come in. I recognized her at once from her photograph. It had not flattered her in the least. Indeed, it had not done her justice, for her exquisite coloring of hair and complexion were quite lost in it. She was, moreover, gowned with a taste and smartness eminently admirable in the future Mrs. Eric Curtis. I felt a thrill of proprietary pride as I stepped out from behind the palms. She was talking to Aunt Grace, but her eyes fell on me. I expected a little start of recognition, for I had sent her an excellent photograph of myself, but her gaze was one of blankest unconsciousness. I felt something like disappointment at her non-recognition, but I consoled myself by the reflection that people often fail to recognize other people whom they have seen only in photographs, no matter how good the likeness may be. I waylaid Edna, who was passing at that time, and said, "Edna, I want you to introduce me to the girl who is talking to your mother." Edna laughed. "So you have succumbed at first sight to our Croydon beauty. Of course I'll introduce you, but I warn you beforehand that she is the most incorrigible flirt in Croydon or out of it. So take care." It jarred on me to hear Marian called a flirt. It seemed so out of keeping with her letters and the womanly delicacy and fineness revealed in them. But I reflected that women sometimes find it hard to forgive another woman who absorbs more than her share of lovers, and generally take their revenge by dubbing her a flirt, whether she deserves the name or not. We had crossed the room during this reflection. Marian turned and stood before us, smiling at Edna, but evincing no recognition whatever of myself. It is a piquant experience to find yourself awaiting an introduction to a girl to whom you are virtually engaged. "Dorothy, dear," said Edna, "this is my cousin, Mr. Curtis from Vancouver. Eric, this is Miss Armstrong." I suppose I bowed. Habit carries us mechanically through many impossible situations. I don't know what I looked like or what I said, if I said anything. I don't suppose I betrayed my dire confusion, for Edna went off unconcernedly without another glance at me. Dorothy Armstrong, gracious powers, who, where, why? If this girl was Dorothy Armstrong, who was Marian Lindsay? To whom was I engaged? There was some awful mistake somewhere, for it could not be possible that there were two girls in Croydon who looked exactly like the photograph reposing in my valise at the very moment. I stammered like a schoolboy. Your face seems familiar to me, Miss Armstrong. I think I must have seen your photograph somewhere." "Probably in Peter Austin's collection," smiled Miss Armstrong. "He had one of mine before he was burnt out. How is he?" "Peter? Oh, he's well," I replied vaguely. I was thinking 100 words to the second, but my thoughts arrived nowhere. I was staring at Miss Armstrong like a man bewitched. She must have thought me a veritable booby. "Oh, by the way, can you tell me, do you know a Miss Lindsay in Croydon?" Miss Armstrong looked surprised and a little bored. Evidently she was not used to having newly introduced young men inquiring about another girl. "Marian Lindsay? Oh, yes." "Is she here tonight?" I said. "No. Marian is not going to parties just now, owing to the recent death of her aunt." "Who lived with them?" Does she look like you at all?" I inquired idiotically. Amusement glimmered, but over Miss Armstrong's boredom. She probably concluded that I was some harmless lunatic. "Like me? Not at all. There couldn't be two people more dissimilar. Marian is quite dark, I am fair, and our features are altogether unlike." "Why, good evening, Jack. Yes, I believe I did promise you this dance." She bowed to me and skimmed away with Jack. I saw Aunt Grace bearing down upon me and fled incontinently. In my own room I flung myself on a chair and tried to think the matter out. Where did the mistake come in? How had it happened? I shut my eyes and conjured up the vision of Peter's room that day. I remembered vaguely that when I had picked up Dorothy Armstrong's picture, I had noticed another photograph that had fallen face down beside it. That must have been Marian Lindsay's, and Peter had thought I meant it. And now, what a position I was in. I was conscious of bitter disappointment. I had fallen in love with Dorothy Armstrong's photograph. As far as external semblance goes, it was she whom I loved. I was practically engaged to another woman. A woman who, in spite of our correspondence, seemed to me now, in the shock of this discovery, a stranger. It was useless to tell myself that it was the mind and soul revealed in those letters that I loved, and that mind and soul were Marian Lindsay's. It was useless to remember that Peter had said she was pretty. Exteriorly, she was a stranger to me. Hers was not the face which had risen before me for nearly a year as the face of the woman I loved. Was ever unlucky wretch in such a predicament before? Well, there was only one thing to do. I must stand by my word. Marian Lindsay was the woman I had asked to marry me, whose answer I must shortly go to receive. If that answer were yes, I must accept the situation and banish all thought of Dorothy Armstrong's pretty face. Next evening at sunset, I went to Glenwood, the Lindsay place. Doubtless, an eager lover might have gone earlier, but an eager lover I certainly was not. Probably Marian was expecting me and had given orders concerning me, for the maid who came to the door conveyed me to a little room behind the stairs. A room which, as I felt as soon as I entered it, was a woman's pet domain. In its books and pictures and flowers it spoke eloquently of dainty femininity. Somehow it suited the letters. I did not feel quite so much the stranger as I had felt. Nevertheless, when I heard a light footfall on the stairs, my heart beat painfully. I stood up and turned to the door, but I could not look up. The footsteps came nearer. I knew that a white hand swept aside the portière at the entrance. I knew that she had entered the room and was standing before me. With an effort, I raised my eyes and looked at her. She stood, tall and gracious, in a ruby splendor of sunset, falling through the window beside her. The light quivered like living radiance over a dark, proud head, a white throat, and a face before whose perfect loveliness the memory of Dorothy Armstrong's laughing prettiness faded like a star in the sunrise. Nevermore in the fullness of the day to be remembered. Yet it was not of her beauty I thought as I stood spellbound before her. I seemed to see a dim little valley full of whispering pines, and a girl standing under the shadows, looking at me with the same great greyish-blue eyes which gazed upon me now from Marian Lindsay's face. The same face, matured into gracious womanhood, that I had seen 10 years ago, and loved, I loved, ever since. I took an unsteady step forward. "Marian," I said. When I got home that night, I burned Dorothy Armstrong's photograph. The next day I went to my cousin Tom, who owns the fashionable studio of Croydon, and, binding him over the secrecy, sought one of Marian's latest photographs from him. It is the only secret I have ever kept from my wife. Before we were married, Marian told me something. "I always remembered you as you looked that day under the pines," she said. "I was only a child, but I think I loved you then and ever afterwards. When I dreamed my girl's dream of love, your face rose up before me. I had the advantage of you that I knew your name. I had heard of you. When Peter wrote about you, I knew who you were. That was why I agreed to correspond with you. I was afraid it was a forward and unwomanly thing to do, but it seemed my chance for happiness, and I took it. I am glad I did." I did not answer in words, but lovers will know how I did answer. Jessamine. When the vegetable man knocked, Jessamine went to the door wearily. She felt quite well acquainted with him. He had been coming all the spring, and his cheery greeting always left a pleasant afterglow behind him. But it was not the vegetable man after all, at least not the right one. This one was considerably younger. He was tall and sunburned, with a ruddy, smiling face and keen, pleasant blue eyes. And he had a spray of honeysuckle pinned on his coat. "Want any garden stuff this morning?" Jessamine shook her head. "We always get ours from Mr. Bell. This is his day to come." "Well, I guess you won't see Mr. Bell for a spell. He fell off a loft out at his place yesterday and broke his leg. I'm his nephew, and I'm going to fill his place till he gets round again." "Oh, I'm so sorry. For Mr. Bell, I mean. Have you any green peas?" "Yes, heaps of them. I'll bring them in." "Anything else?" "Not today," said Jessamine, with a wistful glance at the honeysuckle. Mr. Bell, Jr., saw it. In an instant the honeysuckle was unpinned and handed to her. "If you like posies, you're welcome to this. I guess you're fond of flowers," he added, as he noted the flash of delight that passed over her pale face. "Yes, indeed. They put me so in mind of home, of the country. Oh, how sweet this is." "You're country bred, then? Been in the city long?" "Since last fall. I was born and brought up in the country. I wish I was back. I can't get over being homesick. This honeysuckle seems to bring it right back. We had honeysuckles around our porch at home." "You don't like the city, then?" Oh no, I sometimes feel as if I should smother here. I shall never feel at home, I'm afraid. Where did you live before you came here? Up at Middleton. It was an old-fashioned place, but pretty. Our house was covered with vines, and there were trees all about it, and great green fields beyond. But I don't know what makes me tell you this. I forgot I was talking to a stranger. Pretty little woman, soliloquized Andrew Bell as he drove away. She doesn't look happy, though. I suppose she's married some city chap and has to live in town. I guess I don't agree with her. Her eyes had a real hungry look in them over that honeysuckle. She seemed near about crying when she talked of the country. Jessamine felt more like crying than ever when she went back to her work. Her head ached, and she was very tired. The tiny kitchen was hot and stifling. How she longed for the great, roomy kitchen in her old home, with its spotless floors and floods of sunshine streaming in through the maples outside. There was room to live and breathe there, and from the door one looked out over green, wind-rippled meadows, under a glorious arch of pure blue sky, away to the purple hills in the distance. Jessamine Stacy had always lived in the country. When her sister died and the old home had to go, Jessamine could only accept the shelter offered by her brother, John Stacy, who did business in the city. Of her stylish sister-in-law, Jessamine was absolutely in awe. At first, Mrs. John was by no means pleased at the necessity of taking a country sister into her family circle. But one day, when the servant girl took a tantrum and left, Mrs. John found it very convenient to have in the house a person who could step into Eliza's place as promptly and efficiently as Jessamine could. Indeed, she found it so convenient that Eliza never had a successor. Jessamine found herself in the position of maid of all work and kitchen drudge for board and clothes. She never complained, but she grew thinner and paler as the winter went by. She had worked as hard on the farm, but it was the close confinement and weary routine that told on her. Mrs. John was exacting and querulous. John was absorbed in his business worries and had no time to waste on his sister. Now, when the summer had come, her homesickness was almost unbearable. The next day Mr. Bell came. He handed her a big bunch of sweetbrier roses. "Here you are," he said heartily. "I took the liberty to bring you these today, seeing you're so fond of posies. The country roads are pink with them now. Why don't you get your husband to bring you out for a drive some day? You'd be as welcome as a lark at my farm." "I will, when he comes along, but I haven't seen him yet." Mr. Bell gave a prolonged whistle. "Excuse me, I thought you were Mrs. Something or other for sure. Aren't you mistress here?" "Oh, no, my brother's wife is the mistress here. I'm only Jessamine." She laughed again. She was holding the roses against her face, and her eyes sparkled over them roguishly. The vegetable man looked at her admiringly. "You're a country rose yourself, miss, and you ought to be blooming out in the fields instead of wilting in here." "I wish I was. Thank you so much for the roses, Mr. Bell. Andrew Bell, that's my name." I live out at the pine pastures. We're all bells out there. Can't throw a stone without hitting one. Glad you like the roses." After that, the vegetable man brought Jessamine a bouquet every trip. Now it was a big bunch of field daisies or golden buttercups. Now a green glory of spicy ferns. Now a cluster of old-fashioned garden flowers. "They keep life in me," Jessamine told him. They were great friends by this time. True, she knew little about him, but she felt instinctively that he was manly and kind-hearted. One day, when he came, Jessamine met him almost gleefully. "No, nothing today. There's no dinner to cook." "You don't say. Where are the folks?" "Gone on an excursion. They won't be back until tonight." "They won't? Well, I'll tell you what to do. You get ready, and when I'm through my rounds, we'll go for a drive up the country." "Oh, Mr. Bell. But won't it be too much bother for you?" "Well, I reckon not. You want an excursion as well as other folks, and you shall have it." "Oh, thank you so much. Yes, I'll be ready. You don't know how much it means to me." "Poor little creature," said Mr. Bell as he drove away. "It's downright cruelty. That's what it is, to keep her pent up like that. You might as well coop up a lark in a henhouse and expect it to thrive and sing. I'd like to give that brother of hers a piece of my mind." When he lifted her up to the high seat of his express wagon that afternoon, he said, "Now I want you to do something. Just shut your eyes and don't open them again until I tell you to." Jessamine laughed and obeyed. Finally she heard him say, "Look." Jessamine opened her eyes with a little cry. They were on a remote country road, cool and dim and quiet, in the very heart of the beech woods. The long banners of light fell athwart the grey boles. Along the roadside grew sheets of feathery ferns. Above, the sky was gloriously blue. The air was sweet with the wild woodsy smell of the forest. Jessamine lifted and clasped her hands in rapture. "Oh, how lovely!" "Don't you know where we're going?" said Mr. Bell delightedly. "Out to my farm at Pine Pastures. My aunt keeps house for me, and she'll be real glad to see you. You're just going to have a real good time this afternoon." They had a delightful drive to begin with, and presently Mr. Bell turned into a wide lane. "This is Cloverside Farm. I'm proud of it, I'll admit. There isn't a finer place in the county. What do you think of it?" "Oh, it is lovely. It is like home. Look at those great fields. I'd like to go and lie down in that clover." Mr. Bell lifted her from the wagon and marched her up a flowery garden path. "You shall do it, and everything else you want to. Here, Aunt, this is the young lady I spoke of. Make her at home, while I attend to the horses." Miss Bell was a pleasant-faced woman with silver hair and kind blue eyes. She took Jessamine's hand in a friendly fashion. "Come in, dear. You're welcome as a June rose." When Mr. Bell returned, he found Jessamine standing on the porch with her hands full of honeysuckle, and her cheeks pink with excitement. "I declare, you got roses already," he exclaimed. "If they'd only stay now, and not bleach out again. What's first now?" "Oh, I don't know. There are so many things I want to do. Those flowers in the garden are calling me, and I want to go down to the hollow and pick buttercups. And I want to stay right here and look at things." Mr. Bell laughed. "Come with me to the pasture and see my Jersey calves. They are something worth seeing. Come, Aunt. This way, Miss Stacy." He led the way down the lane, the two women following together. Jessamine thought she must be in a pleasant dream. The whole afternoon was a feast of delight to her starved heart. When the sunset came, she sat down, tired out but radiant, on the porch steps. Her hat had slipped back, and her hair was curling around her face. Her dark eyes were aglow. The roses still bloomed in her cheeks. Mr. Bell looked at her admiringly. If a man could see that pretty sight every night, he thought. And, great Scott, why can't he? What's to prevent, I'd like to know? When the moon rose, Mr. Bell brought his team around, and they drove back through the clear night, past the wonderful stillness of the great beech woods and the wide fields. The farmer looked sideways at his companion. "The little thing wants to be petted and looked after," he thought. "She's just pining away for home and love, and why can't she have it? She's dying by inches in that hole back in town." Jessamine, quite unsuspecting the farmer's meditations, was living over again in fancy the joys of the afternoon. The ramble in the pasture, the drink of water from the spring under the hillside pines, the bountiful, old-fashioned country supper in the vine-shaded dining room, the cup of new milk in the dairy at sunset, and all the glory of skies and meadows and trees. How could she go back to her cage again? The next week, Mr. Bell Sr. resumed his visits, and the young farmer came no more to the side door of number 49. Jessamine missed him greatly. Mr. Bell Sr. never brought her clover or honeysuckle. But one day his nephew suddenly reappeared. Jessamine opened the door for him, and her face lighted up, but Mr. Bell saw that she had been crying. "Did you think I had forgotten you?" he asked. "Not a bit of it. Harvest was on, and I couldn't get clear before. I've come to ask you when you intend to take another drive to Cloverside Farm." "What have you been up to? You look as if you'd been working too hard." I haven't felt very well. I'm glad you came today, Mr. Bell. Perhaps I shall not see you again, and I wanted to say goodbye and thank you for all your kindness." "Goodbye? Why, where are you going?" "My brother went west a week ago," faltered Jessamine. She could not bring herself to tell the clear-eyed farmer that John Stacy had failed and had been obliged to start for the West without saying goodbye to his creditors. "His wife and I are going too, next week." "Oh, Jessamine!" exclaimed Mr. Bell in despair. "Don't go. You mustn't. I want you at Cloverside Farm. I came today on purpose to ask you. I love you, and I'll make you happy if you'll marry me. What do you say, Jessamine?" Jessamine, by way of answer, sat down on the nearest chair and began to cry. "Oh, don't," said the wooer in distress. "I didn't want to make you feel bad. If you don't like the idea, I won't mention it again." "Oh, it isn't that, but I thought nobody cared what became of me. You are so kind. I'm afraid I'd only be a bother to you." "I'll risk that. You shall have a happy home, little girl. Will you come to it?" "Yes." It was very indistinct and faltering, but Mr. Bell heard it, and considered it a most eloquent answer. Mrs. John fumed and sulked, and chose to consider herself hoodwinked and injured. But Mr. Bell was a resolute man, and a few days later he came for the last time to number 49, and took his bride away with him. As they drove through the beech woods, he put his arm tenderly around the shy, smiling little woman beside him, and said, "You'll never be sorry for this, my dear." And she never was.